and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers, and you are in Season 4 of Wrestling at Random, where, as always in this season, anything and everything is in play. As long as it's 10 years older or less, it's been thrown into the randomizer. And as Jeremy has said, throughout this season, the randomizer is bursting at the seams. That is the theme for this season. And what we have is something that I was very excited about, Jeremy, is this is my wheelhouse of wrestling I grew up on after we moved back to Chicago as a young child. This is 1987, Halloween night 1987, NWA World Championship Wrestling from TBS.
I'm just looking it up right now. This would be our third episode of World Championship Wrestling. We did back in Season 2, Episode 32, was NWA World Championship Wrestling from March of 89. We did World Championship Wrestling from June of 87. So the one we're about to do is Halloween of 87. So we did two from 1987. And we also did... so this is the third one. So this is the third episode of NWA World Championship Wrestling. We reviewed October 31st, 1987, Halloween. And what's funny is Jim Cornette's the only person on this show that makes reference to it being Halloween.
Yes.
What a difference when you think of the Saturday night's main event that aired on Halloween. The Halloween episode of Saturday night's main event where everything was about Halloween. Every promo, everything was about Halloween. Here, one mention from Jim Cornette. Otherwise, you'd have no idea that this was Halloween.
Yeah, so strange. It's like you said, the juxtaposition of that as compared to the Saturday night's main event Halloween show is very noticeable. The other thing about this show, and by the way, Jeremy, I'm sure people can go back and listen to those previous episodes, probably that Season 1, Episode 32 show, and hear about the history of this television program.
100%. We do a deep dive on the history of this television program, where it fits with the NWA, WCW, the Saturday night brand, if you will, where that fits in. That's Season 2, Episode 32, if you want to go back and hear the history there.
Yep, which this show did eventually evolve into WCW Saturday Night, which we have in the Patreon, I believe, a relatively recent episode that we recorded that covered a WCW Saturday Night show from 1993. So you can check that out and hear the how different and similar the show was as compared to what they were doing here in 1987. To me, the most noteworthy thing about this show right off the top is, unlike previous episodes of NWA World Championship Wrestling that we've reviewed, or basically any other territory show that we've reviewed on this podcast, here they're building not just to a show at the Omni or a big arena show at Madison Square Garden or Mid-South Coliseum. They are building to the first NWA pay-per-view broadcast, even though they never actually mentioned that it's going to be on
They
pay-per-view.
mentioned closed circuit. Mm-hmm.
They mentioned closed circuit. They never mentioned pay-per-view, but it was going to be, in fact, the first ever pay-per-view offering from the NWA, that being Starrcade 1987, Chi-Town Heat, Bound for Glory, whatever other random subtitles this show had, from the UIC Pavilion in Chicago, not taking place in Greensboro, but in Chicago, Illinois, on November 26, 1987. So we're about a month out from the biggest show of the year for the NWA, and they are hard selling on this episode of World Championship Wrestling throughout.
Yeah, it's funny because they are hard selling that show throughout, but they're also pushing a show at the Omni. They're also pushing a show at out on Long Island, and they're pushing this Chi-Town Heat Starrcade 87. If you want to hear about Starrcade 87, the Survivor Series 87, the head-to-head, and all the stuff that goes on around there, go listen to our episode where we cover Survivor Series 89, because I delve into the history of the Survivor Series. So that's the Season 3, Episode 1, where we cover Survivor Series. There we dive into a little bit of that history, which definitely touches on what happened with Starrcade on pay-per-view as well. So this show...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to dig into the show. So if you had any more thoughts at the top,
Yeah,
go
just a
for it.
few other noteworthy things about this. First, this was also uh, we were heading into Starrcade 87, which was going to be the first major NWA show to feature UWF
Mm.
wrestlers, UWF being what Mid South Wrestling became. When that purchase happened, the UWF wrestlers were absorbed into the NWA, but there was this transition period. We see some of that here on the show, but that was going to be a big part of Starrcade 87 as well.
Yeah, Mid South became the UWF as the Universal Wrestling Federation, as Bill Watts wanted to take his promotion national to compete with Jim Crockett and with Vince McMahon and the WWF, but was was going out of business, was sold to Jim Crockett Promotions, and was absorbed. And like any like any wrestling merger, it's our guys are gonna beat up your guys and take all your titles and and make them go away. And it's funny where the UWF heavyweight title is positioned on that Starrcade card. We'll get to it later.
Yeah, it's definitely not positioned like a world title. It is on a 7-match main card at Starrcade. It is the second match on the show. And the world title, obviously the NWA world title main events that show. So you can see right there how they were slotting that.
This show opens with a split screen. We've got Ric Flair having a match on the left side of the screen, the NWA World Champion Ronnie Garvin on the right side of the split screen, and then we see Garvin get jumped by the Four Horsemen as we roll into the open.
This split screen was so pointless. First, the aspect ratio was all screwed up, so everybody looked all squished together and thin and 11 feet tall. On the left side of the screen, we have Ric Flair putting the figure 4 on. I believe it was Rocky King, one of the Jobber Plus guys who we'll see later on in this show. And on the right side of the screen, it's the Four Horsemen beating down Ronnie Garvin. But you really have a hard time making out what's happening either. It just feels like they got the technology to do split screen like an hour and a half before the show and said, we got to do it. And so this is what we got to open the show.
Tony Schiavone and David Crockett welcome us in the studio. We are coming up on Starrcade, like you mentioned, Chi-Town Heat. They run that down a little bit. And then we go to the ring for our opening match. It's Michael Hayes and gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, accompanied by Precious, taking on Gladiator number 1 and Gladiator number 2.
Oh, these guys, they are glorious, these jobbers. Masked, full bodysuits. We should mention, though, that it's interesting in that it's Jimmy Garvin, it's Michael Hayes. They're managed by Precious, but they're not explicitly called the Freebirds here. It's just not. Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin.
He's called Freebird Michael Hayes,
yes.
though.
Yeah, so we do not yet have Jimmy Garvin as an official member of the Freebirds, or really even an official Freebirds group here in Jim Crockett Promotions. The Masked Gladiators, though, the Gladiators, they look like Smurfs wearing masks, wrestling. Blue bodysuits, blue masks, straight almost out of Continental 89, these guys.
Oh, yeah, and same body type as Continental 89 here, as Gladiator number 2 especially. Big, doughy guy. Teddy Long is our referee.
Yes, and we see him throughout the show. He's the main referee throughout these 2 hours of wrestling.
And of course, 1987 Teddy Long looks older than 2007 Teddy Long, who we also saw on SmackDown. It's unbelievable.
It's the surest bet. The only more sure bet is something that we'll see later on in this show as well, which is that 1987 J.J. Dillon looks exactly like 1997 or 2007 J.J. Dillon. He reached an age,
and 2027 J.J. Dillon will look exactly the same as well.
100%.
So they're teaming with Sting. Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, of course, not the Gladiators, but Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin are teaming with Sting for a 6-man match at Starrcade. Garvin, he threw a good drop kick here. Hayes does a lot of strutting, and then Michael Hayes murders one of the gladiators with a bulldog. This gladiator took a bump off a bulldog headlock like he's RVD taking a pile driver
Yes,
here.
I was just gonna say it was he popped off the mat going head first like an RVD pile driver from Tommy Dreamer. You should mention it's the Freebirds or the future Freebirds, that being Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, teaming with Sting to take on the team of Rick Steiner, Eddie Gilbert, and Larry Zbyszko.
It sounds like the randomizer was putting that one together. Jimmy and Hayes cut a promo after the match with David Crockett. Garvin's excited. He kisses Precious. Not much here.
Hayes is ranting and raving. This is, people talk about quote unquote, and I'm not saying that Hayes was under the influence of anything, but when they talked about coked up 80s wrestling promos, that is Michael Hayes channeling that vibe hardcore here. It's also notable that this interview and several throughout the rest of the show take place at ringside. I think when we all think of NWA World Championship Wrestling, we think of all the interviews taking place 5-10 feet away from the ring at that set, the classic backdrop of the NWA shows. Here, though, this is ringside. David Crockett is the interviewer, and also David Crockett is the lead play-by-play guy here, which it's always awkward because he has so much energy and he's so enthusiastic, but his pacing is so awkward. Like, he'll go a minute and a half without saying anything. Tony doesn't say anything because he's supposed to be the color guy. And then out of nowhere, Crockett will just bombastically come in with something like, Michael Hayes is looking bodacious, and say it just like that, and then stop talking for another minute. It's so odd.
The audio drops out as we come back from commercial. It's fixed now for Ricky Santana taking on Larry Stevens. This match started out as kind of a struggle. Santana looked like he gave him a shoot belly-to-back suplex here.
Yes, this whole match was just weird. As you said, the intro to this match is weird in that we start seeing the match. There's no audio. Then David Crockett cuts in and says, we'll be back. We're going to commercial. They come back from commercial, and they just re-rack the match. And we see the next 90 seconds that we just saw again, but here we have audio instead. The match is not very good. Very little happens. Ricky Santana has headlocks and arm bars on forever. This is one of those where when you first turn the match on, you're not sure who the jobber is, Ricky Santana or Larry Stevens. It felt like they were trying to kind of maybe create like another Ricky Steamboat with Ricky Santana, but he's just a guy. The most noteworthy thing to me about this was that we had fans in the crowd, and there were a couple women, girls, whatever you want to say in particular, that were constantly cheering for the jobbers. We heard this exasperated girl, come on, Larry.
My notes say some weirdo woman in the crowd says, come on, Larry. What? Why are you cheering for Larry Stevens?
This was so strange. Again, not much here. Santana hits a top rope crossbody for the win. He's exactly at the level of like the jobber plus guys that you'd see on shows like this. So it's weird.
But he got a push. I mean, they tried to give Santana a push. He hit a weird thing where they turned him heel for a little bit too, and it was he ended up being a nothing. But he's one of those guys they decide they're going to heat up every now and then, and just goes nowhere.
You can't say they didn't try, I guess, but I think water found its level with him. The other noteworthy thing for me here on commentary, and they push this over and over and over again throughout the show, is that we're less than 4 weeks out from that Omni show that's going to take place the night before Starrcade. And they are aggressively telling us that there are discounted $5 tickets in the balcony. So what this tells me is we're already here in late 1987. We're knee deep in the decline of Omni business for the NWA in Atlanta. Their major arena shows at the Omni. Clearly, the show wasn't selling very well.
We get a Ric Flair video package with a bunch of his big arena entrances and a bunch of his opponents that he's beaten. They flash by in photos. And I'm here for Flair videos. This is great.
This is great. And then the next thing, which if you recall, when you watch the territory shows, they have like a static graphic screen, and sometimes it would have like a little message sending you off the commercial break. They have this for each commercial break, but the one here for this break is truly amazing. It says, "Get comfy, folks. This is where you want to be."
I wanted to be in the Starrcade Control Center.
Yes.
After commercial, we're told Starrcade is called Chi-Town Heat, but it's also called Glory Bound. That's what it is, Glory Bound.
Starrcade,
too many names.
Starrcade 87, Chi-Town Heat, Glory Bound.
Too many names. We've got Tony Schiavone, along with the world's most uncharismatic man, Jim Crockett.
Incorrect. There's one less charismatic man that we'll see later on in this show. But yes, as far as the guy leading a promotion, he does not leap off the screen by any stretch.
No, we're told he's also the president of the Wrestling Network.
This is so strange. So it's the NWA is the governing body of Jim Crockett Promotions and all the other NWA territories that still exist in 1987. But apparently they're also trying to push something called the Wrestling Network. And this isn't like a TV channel or a TV show. They're trying to push something called the Wrestling Network that I guess is also a conglomeration of pro wrestling companies. Is this supposed to specifically be about Jim Crockett Promotions and UWF together being the Wrestling Network, but they ended up dropping that? I don't know. It's very strange, though. We hear Schiavone say this in particular several times throughout the episode.
Yeah, and Flair will mention it in his promo as well later on. And they're also sitting next to the tag team champions, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson. They run down the card. They talk about the top two matches. Of course, the World Championship in a cage. Champion Ronnie Garvin defends the NWA title against Ric Flair. Also in a cage, Lex Luger's U.S. Championship against the career of Dusty Rhodes.
With a big asterisk. So they, in this control center, they're explicit that it is Lex Luger's United States heavyweight title in a steel cage up against Dusty Rhodes' career. They don't give any other caveats. That is what they say. So put a pin in that. Keep that in mind as we go through this show.
There will also be another scaffold match. The first one nearly killed Jim Cornette,
which we talked about. I believe it was that
we did
one?
Starrcade 86 back in season 1. And it was horrible. It's a terrible match. And they're doing it again. Run it back. This time it's the Midnight Express versus the Rock and Roll Express, because who wouldn't want to see that in a regular match? Instead, we have to get a scaffold match with that? What a waste of those two teams.
I was going to say, if you did a spin the wheel, make the deal of all the possible match types for a Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express match, the one you wouldn't want it to land on is a scaffold match. It takes away everything that otherwise makes a Rock and Rolls versus Midnight's match great.
For the World Tag Team Championship, Arn and Tully are going to defend their titles against the Road Warriors in Chicago. Finally, the Road Warriors are going to win the NWA World Tag Team Championship, and they're going to do it in their hometown of Chicago. That'll be an exciting match.
Yeah. Why else, a wrestling fan would ask, would you move Starrcade from its spiritual home and very successful home of Greensboro to Chicago, Illinois, other than to have the Road Warriors win the World Tag Team titles from the hated Horsemen in their worked hometown? Why else would you do that? It's a no-brainer. Such an easy decision.
Sandy Scott is with the managers for the contract signing. It's Paul Ellering and J.J. Dillon signing the contracts for the match. Arn and Tully back at the desk. They're talking about their confidence. Arn cuts a great promo here. This was totally fine.
What I liked about this most is that if you were a wrestling fan in the mid to late 80s and you watched WWF and then you watch this, like, there's a very, very clear distinction between the two promotions, because this is a very serious, understated, sober, quiet contract signing and an intense but not yelling promo from Arn Anderson. Like, if you accept that pro wrestling is real and you accept all the ridiculousness of pro wrestling, this felt like what a contract signing and an interview about an upcoming match would sound like if wrestling was a real sport, which is so different from the over-the-top nature of WWF at the time. So I give them credit for leaning into what made them different as a company.
The card continues for Starrcade. The UWF title, like you mentioned, will be the second on the card. Dr. Death Steve Williams defends it against Barry Windham. And the opener will be the television title unification match. The NWA TV champion Nikita Koloff versus the UWF TV champion Terry Taylor. One person will leave as the television champion.
The funny thing about this is that in terms of the card, as it actually ended up going, this unification match for the TV titles went on fourth, and the UWF world title match went on second.
And spoiler alert, the Road Warriors did not win.
Yeah, we'll get there later. We'll close the show out, I think, talking about what a disaster that was.
We go back to the ring. Dick Murdoch is back in the territory. He's here. He's a bounty hunter. He's here. You can hire him to take guys out. Dick Murdoch is here to take on Tommy Angel. And I enjoy me some Dick Murdoch wrestling. He takes this guy down. He's pushing Teddy Long because he's mean. He dumps Angel to the floor, and then he takes the guy over by the podium, throws him into the podium, knocking it over.
The best part of this is for a split second, you can see David Crockett as this is going on. And most announcers would be like cowering or like trying to get out of the way. But David Crockett, who is the human embodiment of pro wrestling love, with all apologies to Keiji Muto, he is grinning from ear to ear as Dick Murdoch, this dastardly heel, is just beating the hell out of Tommy Angel by the studio set. Just great stuff.
And the fans are so disgusted with Dick Murdoch that they start a chant of egg-sucking dog.
Love it. Egg-sucking dog. It sounds like something I'd heard Dusty Rhodes say on commentary many times. It's also funny when you contrast that with the wimp chants for Iron Mike Sharp on that WWF Championship Wrestling show from 1983. Here, firmly planted in the South, instead it is egg-sucking dog chants for the heel.
Angel's back in. He fights back with some forearms, but runs into a big boot from Murdoch. And Murdoch hits a picture-perfect brainbuster for the victory. What an awesome brainbuster this was.
His brainbusters always look horrifying, and yet it seems like everybody's always okay. Like, it looks like the man is going to be dead, but I'd never heard of anyone being killed by a Dick Murdoch brainbuster, so I guess it's all right.
Tony interviews Murdoch at the now fixed podium. It's back up, and he talks about injuring Dr. Death and Nikita Koloff. And then he cuts a promo on Dusty Rhodes, his ex-tag team partner. He calls him a yellow Oklahoman for not fighting him, the worst thing a Texan can call you.
He also talks about the match that Dusty Rhodes has at Starrcade, and he says that if Dusty loses, he has to leave the NWA and he can't wrestle anywhere for 90 days.
90 days.
Not a career match, but 90 days, which, again, this kind of goes back and forth all show. And then you get the sense that David Crockett and Tony Schiavone halfway through the show realize that this must be confusing, because they then try to convince us that, well, wrestling is a fickle business. It's out of sight, out of mind. And if Dusty Rhodes, one of the biggest stars of the past decade plus in professional wrestling, loses a match where he has to leave for 90 days, all the fans and promoters will forget about him, and therefore his career will be effectively over.
This is a cavernous leap of logic
Yes.
to get the 90 days equals a career. But yeah, Dick Murdoch, he says he's offered money but he doesn't take it. He just wants to injure these guys for fun.
I also like Quick Fashion Corner. It's an underrated thing when a wrestler is wearing their wrestling gear, which in this case is short trunks and black boots, and then are wearing a hat. That always cracks me up. And here we've got Dick Murdoch wearing a black hat with George Jones on it, which I'm assuming was his favorite country music superstar at the time. Quite the look here for old Dick Murdoch.
Your favorite manager, Paul Jones, comes out with his guys, Ivan Koloff and the Warlord.
What a team. Ivan Koloff and the Warlord, who are both apparently part of Paul Jones' stable with the Barbarian, but I guess the Barbarian and the Warlord had not yet been put together as the Powers of Pain. The best thing about this, though, is that the second Paul Jones comes out to the ring, David Crockett yells with, again, childlike glee and excitement, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, Puddinhead!"
And the camera like lingers on Paul Jones for a while, and Paul Jones is just staring back at the camera. And I thought, as soon as I watched it, I'm like, Adam's gonna make this the GIF for this week's social media post. It's just Paul Jones looking weird at the side-eyed at the camera. But no,
I try to spend.
You chose Arn Anderson, which was a better choice.
I chose Arn Anderson mostly because I try to spend no more time with Paul Jones on my screen or in my life or in my brain than contractually obligated. I'm contractually obligated to do so through this podcast.
Their opponents, David Isley and Rocky King. Rocky King, awesome jobber plus. He's right up there with who's the other guy? Mike Jackson. Like those are the two guys who are like the best jobbers.
And when you see them, you think this guy should have more of a push than Ricky Santana, who we saw earlier.
Yeah, no doubt. And King tries some drop kicks, but Ivan dumps him outside. Jones gets in a shot on the outside. Ivan tags in the Warlord. And Ivan from the apron, he's choking Rocky with the chain. And the Warlord then is on offense, and he is terrible. These kicks were horrifyingly bad.
He's the absolute epitome of big, jacked up, bloated gym guy who couldn't hurt a fly but has to somehow try to look intimidating. Just imagine how bad he was. Remember how bad he was in, was it 1991, that Royal Albert Hall show? Didn't he have a match with, he had a match with someone, and it was really, really bad. Here, this is 4 years younger, 4 years less experience, and thank God that he had the wily veteran, a guy who has sneakily become a podcast regular, Ivan Koloff, who is not as good as he was 4, 5, 6, 10 years prior, but still
a solid dude. A
solid guy, and exactly the type of guy that you'd want in a tag team with a big stiff like Warlord to try at least to show him the ropes.
Well, it's exactly what they did with Nikita Koloff prior. Now they're like, okay, help this young guy along be a future star. Now here's another one with him and the Barbarian. Make these guys future stars. And like, I'm sure having green young guys, you want to pair them with a veteran like Ivan Koloff for not only in ring but out of ring also. Like be traveling with this guy, and I'm sure he was a big help to their development.
Now, they could have just had Paul Jones travel with them. That would have leveled him up.
There's a help. That's so Warlord does a terrifying. He's pressing the guy over his head. He drops him down, catches him in a backbreaker.
This was awesome. I was not prepared for this because I wanted to dislike everything Warlord did in this match, but this press slam backbreaker was super cool.
It was cool. I was terrified because I'm like, well, what is he doing?
Yes. Well, and this may not have started with him knowing that this is what he was going to do. Correct. It was terrifying because it's the Warlord doing this, and I was concerned for his opponent, but it came off awesome. It was another one of those moves that we talk about where guys will have a finisher and then they'll do a move earlier in the match that's so much more impactful than their finisher. The Warlord, the only finisher I knew that he ever had was a full Nelson.
Full Nelson, yeah.
How much more of a badass would the Warlord have come off as if he was using a press slam backbreaker as his finisher?
Warlord has Isley over his shoulder in a Canadian backbreaker position as Ivan comes off the top, dropping an elbow while Isley's being held by the Warlord, and they get the victory. No Paul Jones promo. You lucked out on this one.
Thank God. That finisher, by the way, it was part of the endless and ultimately fruitless quest for all tag teams in the 80s and early 90s to try to find a variation of the Doomsday Device that was as cool as the Doomsday Device. No one ever figured it out. And on this night, Ivan Koloff and the Warlord did not either.
After commercial, it's the Mighty Wilbur versus Cougar J.
Cougar J. This threw me off because I remember Cougar J into like the mid 90s, I believe, as a WCW jobber. He was not in great shape. He had like dark brown hair. Here, he has a horrible bleach blonde mullet. He's got a brown, like light mustache facially. He looks like a cross between Steve Corino and Stevie Richards. This is just a weird looking dude, but his opponent, Mighty Wilbur. We talk about like in the long line of things in the 80s in wrestling, trying to imitate other things in the 80s in wrestling, whether it be the Doomsday Device or everyone wanting to have a Rock and Roll Express style team. This is part of the epidemic of every promotion trying to have their own version of Hillbilly Jim. And here,
they want to have a
Wilbur.
Haystacks Calhoun.
Yes.
They want to have an Uncle Elmer. They want to have a Hillbilly Jim. Everybody wants to have that lovable Southern guy. This farmer guy. This guy, Wilbur's story is a pretty hilarious storyline because like it was Paul Jones and his heel stable, and Paul Jones did all these promos for weeks and weeks and weeks saying the Mighty Wilbur is coming, the Mighty Wilbur is coming, and it's like, oh yeah, who's this big scary? They're like, he's 6'3", he's 500 pounds, and like you're like, oh my gosh, well, who's this monster heel Mighty Wilbur gonna be that's gonna show up here? And then this big fat guy with a big smile, a beard. He's wearing overalls, but they're shants. They're the fat guy shants, not quite shorts, not quite pants.
They're like overall capris.
and he comes out and he's smiling and he's following the rules and he's high-fiving everybody and he's a total babyface, and Paul Jones is outraged and he's abusive to Wilbur until Wilbur finally quickly turns on Paul Jones to then go on his own and end up feuding with Paul Jones and gives him the nickname Puddinhead.
Yes, which we'll hear Mighty Wilbur say in a promo afterwards. This match was terrible. Mighty Wilbur is awful. He does a double axe handle like a Polish hammer. He teases going for a splash but feels bad about it at first, but then decides to go through with it. Hits the big splash, and then this promo, and I get the idea is he's like this understated country bumpkin nice guy, yep. But it's negative charisma. He somehow totally stumbles over his lines and gets confused. He can't figure out whether he's talking about Paul Jones or Ivan Koloff, which is amusing. He's just, the other thing is that he barely has a Southern accent, which does not work for this character. Like, you expect him to have this really, really thick Southern accent, and there's almost nothing at all.
Yeah, Wilbur lost his place and said he wasn't used to all these cameras and stuff. And then he said he wanted Ivan Koloff, not Puddinhead Paul Jones. He's sick of Ivan using a Russian chain. He's going to use an American chain. He's smiley and shaking hands, and
is there a big difference between a Russian chain and an American chain? Like, I was trying to figure out, like, is he trying to say that the Russian chain has the sickle on it and he doesn't need the sickle? I don't know.
So 2 months after this, January 1988, Bunkhouse Stampede match. Wilbur ends up being one of the finalists in the Bunkhouse Stampede match. But he's injured. in that match. He ends up having to have surgery on his knee and hip and completely cancels any push that he was going to have as one of the finalists in the Bunkhouse Stampede.
Shame that happened, but man, it's just he sticks out in such an odd, weird way. In 1987, this still felt like the NWA, and this just. I know other promotions had a guy like this, but this just felt like a weird WWF style character in the midst of this otherwise very serious promotion. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it worked. Like you said, the story as you described it sounded like it was okay, but I didn't come away from this feeling like I had missed out by not seeing or remembering a lot of Mighty Wilbur.
No. Wilbur passed away in 2014 at the age of 57. We get the Four Horsemen graphic. The only time we get a graphic transitioning us between matches or promos.
Yeah, their logo. Like, it was interesting that this early on, we had a faction, we had a faction name, and they had a logo. They had branding, which you didn't see that often in 80s professional wrestling outside of the WWF.
This incarnation of the Four Horsemen is Hiro Matsuda, J.J. Dillon, and the U.S. champion Lex Luger.
Yeah, this is very strange. So you would recall in 1989, which that episode of World Championship Wrestling, which you reviewed in a previous season, that Hiro Matsuda was with Ric Flair, and you had Barry Windham kicking around, and it was like the Horsemen, were they a thing? Were they not a thing? They were teasing the idea of Butch Reed joining the Horsemen, but Hiro Matsuda was a manager, clearly a manager. This is very confusing because in this promo that Lex Luger cuts, he's talking about how there's no way Dusty Rhodes is going to get past him. He will end Dusty Rhodes' career for 90 days. But if Dusty somehow gets past him, then he has to go through, in the ring, the Shogun, Hiro Matsuda, in late 1987?
Way past his prime. Hiro Matsuda, we're going to see a clip later. He's actually wrestling. This is way past his prime. He gets introduced by Luger after a typical Luger promo, and the graphic under Hiro Matsuda just says Shogun.
Yes, I thought Mauricio Hua was here. But this was so strange. When you talked about guys with no charisma, Hiro Matsuda, just an absolute black hole of charisma, whether it was here in 87 or 89. As you mentioned, we'll see a clip of him in the ring later. The highlight of this promo was Lex Luger saying that Hiro Matsuda, Shogun, quote, knows every single neuron in the human body.
No, the best part is when he says he stays up at night chewing on ginseng roots. That's
what a promo. This was Luger was such a strange promo back then because it was like he would always almost feel like he was cutting a good promo. And then 2/3 of the way through, it would just go off the rails.
Florida heavyweight champion Mike Rotundo is in the ring.
Why is there a Florida heavyweight champion in Jim Crockett Promotions in late 1987? Like, this is
between all the UWF belts, all of the NWA belts. I'm getting big AEW in 2022 vibes here.
Which of these is the All Atlantic title? That's all I need to know.
So Mike Rotunda is taking on Thunderfoot number 2, not to be confused with Gladiator number 2. They have similar costumes, but are two different people.
Yes, Thunderfoot number 2, again, another full bodysuit and masked jobber. This time it's a black bodysuit with kind of an honestly snazzy blue horizontal stripe across the front. I love that on the front and back, emblazoned in this stripe is a lightning bolt, which, being overly pedantic, I'm like, shouldn't he be Lightning Foot instead of Thunderfoot? Why is he Thunderfoot with a lightning bolt? He also has a nice baby blue mask. So, I mean, he's got a continental jobber body, but at least the masked bodysuited guys here in 1987 in the NWA, their bodysuits seem like they were tailored for them. Whereas those continental jobbers from 89, it was just stuff that had laying around the locker room, and however you squished in there, that's how you were going to be.
When he teams with his partner, are they the Thunderfoots? Are they the Thunderfeet? Or are they just Thunderfoot 1 and 2?
Well, I feel like feet-based content is what people come to this podcast for. So I'm sure we'll be getting some weird responses to that. But yes, the Thunderfoots or Thunder Feet. We'll put up a poll.
Inzaguri by Rotunda, and the crowd starts chanting for an airplane spin. Is this the first time in history and the last time where an airplane spin chant erupts?
Well, also, not only is it one of the first or last times that an airplane spin chant was erupted, but how often did you hear a lot of chanting from fans that wasn't just chanting like oh, "Go Ricky, go" or something?
Yeah.
It was really weird to hear 1987 wrestling fans chanting for a move. This crowd was super fun. They're hyped all the way through. It's a weird mix of young children, teenage girls, and then a group of guys in the front row who all look like they're trying to be in the sequel to Risky Business, wearing
Indoor
sunglasses
shades.
inside.
Yeah.
It's a fun mix and a fashion corner on the arena, if you can call it that. The set, this TV studio, for my money, and maybe it's just because it's one of the things I grew up on. But my favorite studio set between the backdrop where the announcers are, and then where the wrestling is taking place with the ring, and then the flags of basically all the countries of the United Nations hanging from the rafters of this TV studio. Such a cool look.
Rotundo obliges the fans, gives them an airplane spin, and gets the victory.
Rotunda, body-wise, he looks like physically almost exactly like pre-getting too heavy Adrian Adonis. They have the exact same body type, and I wasn't prepared for that. It's Rotunda in regular wrestling tights instead of his normal singlet. He looked fine here. It wasn't like some of the revelatory Mike Rotunda appearances that we've had on this podcast where we're like, oh my God, this guy was incredible. He showed no emotion, and he wanted to get in and out quickly, and he did.
We start hour number 2 with Jim Cornette and Big Bubba. Cornette opens by saying it's Halloween, the only day of the year where David Crockett can walk around and feel accepted.
And he does this, just to reiterate what you mentioned earlier, Jim Cornette has like a jack-o'-lantern on his tennis racket case. He is Halloween themed when no one else is.
He introduces the Midnight Express, the U.S. Tag Team Champions. They come out to take on Ed Frank and Alan Martin, the team of first name basis.
I love it. Yes. First name basis. All four first and last names are first names. That's tremendous. What isn't as tremendous, however, is the knockoff on the WWE Network Peacock version of this show. It's no FTR theme song or we're talking about Midnight Express theme song knockoffs, that's for sure.
Cornette stays on commentary instead of joining at ringside. This double team move. Okay. Eaton sends Martin into the ropes. He puts his head down like he's going to go for a backdrop. Martin tries to leapfrog over, but is out of control, falling forward right into a Stan Lane kick to the face.
I love this. This was off the rails, but it looked cool. Talk about off the rails. I have no idea what Jim Cornette was referring to here, where out of nowhere, he said that he was talking to Arn Anderson earlier, and Arn Anderson said that he was going to, quote, stick a candle down David Crockett's throat. What?
Because he's a jack-o'-lantern. Because that's it's another Halloween reference here. So
I see. I guess
it's a bit of a stretch, but
the theme of this match, outside of that, was really cool double teams from the Midnight Express, including an awesome finish with the Midnight Express take on Total Elimination.
Yeah, they do this high-low where Lane is on his knees like he's going to schoolboy him from behind Frank, and Eaton lariats him at the same time. Midnight's get the pin, but it looked brutal because this guy didn't know how to take this high-low very well, and he just kind of bent in half. It looked brutal.
Well, it also was one of those things that, like, I don't have a recollection of the Midnight Express using this as a finisher or a setup. And so I honestly wonder, like, had they done this before? Was this something they just came up with mid-match? But as you said, Frank was not ready.
We get a video clip of the Texas Cowboys, a masked team attacking the Midnight Express, and everyone knows that this is the Rock and Roll Express, obviously under a mask.
They are wearing jeans and suspenders and clearly have the bodies of Robert Gibson and Ricky Morton.
Ricky Morton's hair is hanging out the back of this mask.
Yes, and Robert Gibson's chest hair obviously showing us that's who that was. This was about as much of a, I guess, pulling the wool over on people as Dusty Rhodes being the Midnight Rider, the Yellow Dog.
Stan and Bobby just stand there, nonchalant, looking around while Cornette's cutting a ranting and raving promo. Stan and Bobby entertaining each other is always the most entertaining part of these promos. I love it.
As Jim Cornette is just going insane on these promos. Here he actually says, at one point he said they've enjoyed beating up the Rock and Roll Express before, but now homicide is on their minds. They are going to literally kill the Rock and Roll Express. And you can see Eaton and Stan Lane behind him like, really? Are we going to kill them?
The Superpowers, the television champion Nikita Koloff and his partner Dusty Rhodes comes out. Nikita talks about unifying the TV titles, and this is where we see the clip of Hiro Matsuda taking on Dusty Rhodes at an arena match. And Matsuda throws salt in the eyes of Dusty. He throws some chops and then puts on an armpit squeeze onto Dusty Rhodes.
An armpit nerve hold. The only thing that this clip really told me, though, was that, holy crap, Hiro Matsuda, old man jacked. I was not prepared for that being what Hiro Matsuda looked like. He was shredded.
Dusty fights back with some jabs. Johnny Weaver says, put on the Weaver Lock Sleeper. And he puts the sleeper on as Weaver puts it on J.J. Dillon outside. Lex Luger comes out to make the save. And Hiro Matsuda puts the armpit squeeze back on. And Dusty, back in the studio, is cutting a promo about this. He then moves his attention to Dick Murdoch. And then he mentions, when this is over, Ronnie Garvin's still going to be the world champion. So coming out of this promo, what I've learned is everybody is feuding with Dusty Rhodes.
Yes. He is the sun. Everyone else, they are the planets. That is how the NWA is oriented at this time. This also is one of those great promos / video packages. I know we've talked about this several times, Jeremy. We love it when this happens, where a guy in an angle or a match is doing commentary over the video of his angle. We've got Dusty like talking about how great Dusty Rhodes looks, talking about how handsome he is. This is, I don't know. This is something else. Fashion Corner, by the way, when Lex Luger hits the ring, he's in full gear, tights, boots, but he's wearing this like little boy 80s striped polo shirt. And it just killed me. Like, I don't know how he could possibly think he looked intimidating or threatening at all doing this run-in.
No, it looked like he's business casual coming straight from the office, and he only had time to take his khakis off. He didn't have any. He left the polo on.
He had time to take his pants off, but not his shirt. Also, I thought of you, Jeremy. We've talked before about the NWA World Six-Man Tag Team Championships.
Useless
And always on Dusty Rhodes. There was never a point where he was not 1/3 of the six-man tag team champions. And I almost made this the GIF just to get a laugh out of you. Dusty is talking, cutting a promo, and then the graphic pops up when just Dusty Rhodes is talking, and it says six-man tag team champions, plural. Like, he's the only one that matters. That broke me just a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I'm always hesitant about the AEW Trios Championship coming back. I'm traumatized from the poorly done six-man tag team championships of the WCW NWA era here. What was not poorly done is the tag team of the New Breed. I always loved the New Breed. They're taking on Rick Ryder and Robbie Idol.
The New Breed, Sean Royal, and Chris Champion. Chris Champion would go on to be Yoshi Kwan in WCW some 7, 8 years later, 6 years later, whatever it was, obviously looks completely different here. He also facially and facial expression wise, I'm getting a little bit of Max Caster vibes from Chris Champion here. The vibe that I was getting even more than that, though, was high as blank. Chris Champion was absolutely high out of his mind in this match. There is no other explanation for what he was doing here.
So to recap, the gimmick for the New Breed is that they're time travelers from the future, from 2002. They're the New Breed of professional tag team wrestling, and they were actually involved in a car accident, which meant Chris Champion couldn't wrestle for several months. When he returned, he wore a cast on his arm decorated with computer parts, claiming it was a, quote, future cast. And
that's amazing. So he was basically Kushida versus Kushida, or may it actually be that Techno Team 2000 traveled back to 1987 and was the New Breed.
And he's wearing the cast here in this match. The car crash itself, it ended the New Breed as heels as they came back as babyfaces, began a feud with the Midnight Express. The feud did not last long as Sean Royal retired a short time later to become a construction worker. And that ended the New Breed team. Chris Champion, like you mentioned, he went on to wrestle for a long time after. He wrestled as a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle character in FMW for Japan. And then in 93 WCW, he was Yoshi Kwan. He last wrestled an indie show as Yoshi Kwan in 2017.
Oh, my God. I'm actually sad that I wasn't there for that.
He passed away from a stroke in 2018 at the age of 57. Royal, he drags his opponent Jobber to the corner so that he could tag out. One of my favorite spots you can do in a tag team jobber match. Royal holds him up in a suplex position as Champion hits a drop kick. This is your point earlier, trying to recreate a Doomsday Device type maneuver. And the finish comes with Royal holding him in a suplex position while Champion comes off the top with a cross body, and the New Breed gets the victory.
My favorite part about this was nothing actually that took place in the ring. At some point late in this match, David Crockett just starts talking nonsense. He says something about the Gucci girls wanting to say hi to Tony Schiavone, and Tony Schiavone, in the most polite way, in not so many words, tells David Crockett to shut the hell up. There was something about this that I got the impression Tony Schiavone did not want David Crockett to delve into any further on national television.
We get that same Ric Flair entrance video again. Okay, I said I liked it, but I don't know if I like it twice on the same show liked it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, granted, I don't mind it. I guess 2 hours they figured one person, maybe somebody didn't see it in the first hour, they'll see it in the second hour, but it was very strange to see the exact same promo video twice. This wasn't like a commercial break where it's, they go and do the rundown for the arena, like that sort of thing. We're used to that. This was definitely a little odd.
Ricky Morton of the Rock and Roll Express taking on Joe Lynn. Ricky's got a taped up shoulder. He wins immediately with a small package, and he cuts a promo after the match with David Crockett, talks about the Starrcade match with the Midnight Express coming up. Eddie Gilbert taking on Tony Suber. Eddie Gilbert comes out to some overdubbed generic guitar music, and I was unsuccessful in finding what theme song he came out to in 1987. So if you know, we have the smartest listeners in wrestling that listen to this podcast. So if you know, shoot us a message on Twitter, Instagram, leave a YouTube comment. Tell us, what song were they overdubbing here? I know that Jimmy Garvin would come out to Sharp Dressed Man and they would overdub that. I dug around, I couldn't find it. So I need someone to tell me what Eddie Gilbert's actual theme song was.
Wasn't there that song "Hot Stuff" by Donna Summer? Could that have been it?
It would make sense, but I need confirmation from the smartest fans in
It came
wrestling.
out in 1979. I'm actually ashamed that I don't remember because Eddie Gilbert, as a child, was one of my favorite wrestlers. He was my dad's favorite wrestler during this time period. So it's something I should remember, but I sadly don't.
They do some bad amateur wrestling in this match. Just not good.
Which is surprising because Eddie Gilbert does have a legit amateur wrestling background, if I'm not mistaken, but it did not work.
I'll put this on Tony Suber then.
Yeah, Big Tony Suber was a large dude, but I wouldn't call him overly athletic. I was too focused on Eddie Gilbert basically being dressed as Mitsuharu Misawa here. He comes out with a green ring jacket. He has green tights with white boots. I was ready for him to adjust the elbow pad, throw a rolling elbow, but sadly we did not get that.
Eddie with some punches wins with a hot shot. And then we get...
Not a whole lot to this one. I did enjoy... we had some people in the crowd chanting hot stuff, and then other people in the crowd yelling back, "You ain't nothing, Gilbert. You stink." I love those 80s insults.
We get a Dusty Rhodes version of the earlier Ric Flair entrance videos that we saw twice. It's like Dusty's like, if you're going to run this Flair one, I'm going to need a Dusty one as well.
Exactly. If he gets two, I get at least one.
Kevin Sullivan joins Tony at the desk. Sullivan runs down the entire Starrcade card. He's his own personal event center running down this card and recapping all of the feuds.
It's really strange. He does an effective job at it.
Sure.
But he's like out here in his wrestling gear, looking like Kevin Sullivan, just talking on everybody else's matches. At first, it seems like he might be hinting that he's going to help Dusty Rhodes even the odds against the whole crew, Dick Murdoch, Lex Luger, Shogun, Hiro Matsuda. But he kind of doesn't really finish that thought, and this just ends.
No, I mean, it ends with him basically talking about the Long Island show and how Dusty Rhodes is in trouble because here's all the guys that want to feud with Dusty, and it's a long list, and from the Dick Murdochs all the way to the Lex Lugers here. And so, basically, if you forgot, everybody is feuding with Dusty Rhodes.
Well, in that Long Island show, that's War Games. They're promoting as War Games 4. I'm endlessly amused because both David Crockett earlier and Kevin Sullivan here, they say at Nassau or in Nassau, and the way they say it, it doesn't make you think of Nassau Coliseum, the arena on Long Island. It makes you think that they're talking about Nassau as in Nassau and the Bahamas. We're taking a cruise to War Games, everybody.
The Bruise Cruise before.
Yes, the Bruise Cruise. Oh my God.
When I was a kid, I wanted to go on the Bruise Cruise so bad.
Same.
So bad. My parents, you would have thought that you would have thought I asked for $1 million. You would have thought that I asked for a trip to somewhere extremely expensive and crazy because just even floating out the idea of the Bruise Cruise was laughed out of the. There was no chance that would ever happen.
I was right there with you wanting that, and right there with you in that. There is nothing less likely in my life to have happened than my parents saying, "Yes, son, we will take you on the Bruise Cruise."
No. World Tag Team Champions Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard take on Keith Steinborn and Rex King. The Four Horsemen.
The future. He was Timothy Well in Well Done, the tag team of Stephen Dunn and Timothy Well. That being Steve Dahl, who teamed with Rex King for a long time in the USWA and elsewhere. But yes, this is an early Timothy Well.
The Four Horsemen are super popular, especially with those sunglass-wearing guys at ringside we mentioned.
Yes.
You get Tully and Arn double teaming. Arn hits one of the best spine busters I've ever seen. This was perfection. They finish it off with a double gourd buster, which is their face-first suplex for the pin. This was too short. I want more Arn and Tully domination.
Yeah, there was literally zero offense from the Jobbers, and I would have liked to have seen like a little comeback from them. The Horsemen cut them off. Well, first off, we had Tully doing the Garvin stop, it was really cool, but it was annoying to me that neither announcer picked up on it because it was clearly the Horsemen sending a message to Ronnie Garvin ahead of Starrcade. Nothing there. The other thing was that as much as like we talk about how Arn and Tully you think of FTR when you see them. I've never had that as strong as seeing Tully here. I got super, super strong Cash Wheeler vibes from him. Maybe it was just the trunks, the way he was moving, but that was noteworthy as well.
Definitely a good comp. Ric Flair comes out to the desk to cut a promo. I'll play it in its entirety because he's asked one question and he just goes for 3 minutes.
And you and Ronnie Garvin in the cage.
Well, what it is, as we've discussed, Tony Schiavone, as we're looking at a multi-million-dollar production, we have come to know as Starrcade. Each year the purses get bigger, the wrestlers get better, the competition becomes more key because there's more to lose, there's more at stake. Look at Dusty Rhodes. He's walked out here and told the world that if he doesn't beat my pal, the package, he's through for 90 days. Think about it. Dusty Rhodes wrestling apart 90 days. It would make my life. It would make my life. Dusty Rhodes gone. Then you got Ronnie Garvin for a little over a month now. He's been the world's champion, the one and only. He's walked the streets. He's attempted to style and profile. He has ridden around in his pickup truck with fat rods. He has told the world he's the best. Now, he's got to walk the aisle in Chi-Town and face the man. He doesn't have to prove it to the fans. He's got to prove it to me. Now you got the Road Warriors. Awesome. One of the biggest talents in our business in their own hometown. They got to beat not Arn and Tully, but the world champions, the one and only. And I'm telling you, from a man that knows this sport better than anybody, they better be at their best because Blanchard and Anderson are ready for nothing but glory, money, notoriety, and lots of ladies in Chi-Town. You know Ric Flair's gonna turn it on. I'm gonna be dressed, and looking as only I can look. Chicago, Chi-Town Heat, Starrcade 87, and Tony Schiavone. Let's not forget that the night before, think about it, New York City, bright lights, big cities, pretty ladies, Nature Boy, New York. Think about it. Luger, Flair, Anderson, Blanchard, James J. Dillon, 5 or 6 million women putting their stuff together right now because we are taking, and I mean this literally, we are taking New York City. You know why? Because we are the best. We are the NWA. We are Crockett Promotions. We are the Wrestling Network. We are what wrestling's all about. New York City here, Chicago here, JD on my left, Linda on my right. But I'm not telling any of the girls who I'm going to give it to in Chicago until that night. Woo!
As great as the actual Ric Flair promo is, the highlight of this whole thing is watching Tony Schiavone watch Ric Flair. Flair is finally done after 3 minutes nonstop. Tony just gives this understated shake of the head, looks at the camera, and just kind of says in a low voice, "No way." And they go to commercial. Like, he was that floored by Ric Flair being Ric Flair in his presence, which would happen every week, but this was Flair on one. Tony he just had no words. He could not convey how incredible this was, other than to just say, "No way."
UWF World TV Champion Terry Taylor taking on Curtis Thompson.
We are stealthily a U.S. Mail / Firebreaker chip Curtis Thompson podcast.
Hangman's neckbreaker and a quick figure 4. Terry Taylor wins immediately. He then cuts a promo. He's over there with Eddie Gilbert at the desk cutting a promo with Tony, and he says that Nikita Koloff has skinny legs. What? He's like,
yeah, I didn't understand the skinny legs. He also didn't do a good job explaining what this other title that what it was that Nikita Koloff stole from him. Apparently he had another championship. I guess maybe it was the 6-man tag titles. Maybe Nikita holds those with Dusty now. But yeah, this was weird. Skinny legs, Nikita Koloff? What?
It didn't work for me. Eddie Gilbert hypes up his 6-man at Starrcade as well. And then Shivani signs us off. The show is over. The show, it had no angles. They are weeks out from Starrcade. And they are running in place. This show was kind of boring.
It was. And it was very surprising to me because, again, the fact that it had a focal point, a major pay-per-view event that they were spending 2 hours building up to, I would have really thought that more would have happened. I'm a proponent for getting your angles in place, with a decent amount of time before the show, but they had done too much, too far out from this show, and now this is just sort of like a caretaker episode. Like, they're just running in place. They're not even getting you from point A to point B. You're at point A. At the end of the show. Nothing has progressed from where we were at the start. The closest thing to an angle is the Hiro Matsuda Dusty angle from a different show that they showed us again here. But otherwise, everything is as it was 2 hours earlier. We're just 2 hours closer to Starrcade.
No, and it was a boring show, which I don't, that's not usually how I leave a World Championship Wrestling TV show. So yeah, it was pretty surprising and I can't imagine it gets any better. Just like you still have 3 more weeks at least until Starrcade. This is crazy. And then, the episode beforehand is going to be, the go-home show isn't really a go-home show. Those are just hey, nobody's here this week because everyone's on the road. So it's really it's just, 3 more nothing shows probably coming up. So.
Yeah, because not only are the matches set, but the angles to create the matches have all already happened. We saw in that split screen at the very start of the show, the Horsemen beat down of Ronnie Garvin. That was part of setting up this angle. Obviously, from listening to that Terry Taylor promo, everything that was going to happen to set up his match with Nikita Koloff has already happened. We're already in the thick of the career / 90 days stipulation for Dusty Rhodes against Lex Luger. Mm-hmm. We had the contract signing for the very low-key contract signing for the tag title match with the Road Warriors and Tully and Arn. So yeah, we're just waiting for the pay-per-view to happen. We got a month to kill.
Best thing on the show for you?
Oh man, that's there was nothing that really stood out as great. So it's kind of tough for me. Maybe Jim Cornette's tennis racket because it was actually Halloween themed.
The only Halloween thing here, yeah.
I mean, seeing Arn and Tully do their thing, even though it was very, very short, was always fun. But really, there's I'm scrolling back through my notes. There's not much. There wasn't anything offensively bad. I mean, the Mighty Wilbur stuff was dumb, but there wasn't anything offensively bad. It felt like a nothing show at a time, not only in terms of leading to this pay-per-view, but at a time for the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions and their war with WWF. It needed to be a lot more exciting of a product or exciting of a show going into their first ever pay-per-view than what we were getting here.
Yeah, I think for me that Ric Flair promo was great. The Ric Flair video package was great. Yeah. The Arn Anderson spine buster, the Dick Murdoch brain buster. I think those were the highlights for me. Is there a worse thing on this show for you?
I mean, I think the worst thing on this show was the Arn Anderson spine buster. The Dick Murdoch brain buster. I think those were the highlights for me. Is there a worse thing on this show for you? For me, it's the fact that 90 days is the end of the career for Dusty Rhodes. They're trying to sell us on the fact that Dusty Rhodes' career is in peril. It's in jeopardy. It could be over. And then they're trying to tell us that if he's gone for 90 days, everybody will just forget that Dusty Rhodes existed. He will never get booked again. That's several bridges too far for me.
Yeah, I think worst thing on the show for me is that there was nothing besides the beatdown of Ronnie Garvin on this. There wasn't even an interview or anything. There wasn't an update on the condition of Ronnie Garvin. He's your world's champion. He was nowhere to be found. There was no mention.
They didn't talk like he was hurt. Like, not only was there no update, they didn't even give us a reason to think there should be an update. We just saw that weird split screen at the beginning, and that was it.
So a total nothing show, but had fun watching it and recapping it. And we mentioned a lot of other shows that we did that have good history segments, that have some more context around some of this stuff. So those are either in the back catalog of this podcast that you're listening to right now or via our Patreon. We've got over 100 episodes of bonus content that aren't in the free feed, that are over in our bonus content. How do you get it? You go to patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, or if you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, you hit the big subscribe button there. It unlocks not just one of those episodes of bonus content. It unlocks the entire back catalog, over 100 episodes for the price of 1 month. It's unbelievable. It unlocks all that for you. It's all there. And it's evergreen content. It's new to you. Go sign up if you haven't already. It's the best way to support the show. If you can't support the show financially, in these times, we understand you can also support us by telling your wrestling fan friends about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, so please tell them about us, show them how to subscribe to the podcast, and have them take a trip down memory lane with us. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. All the ways to interact with us via social media, YouTube, the video version of this as well. Give us a subscribe over on the YouTube. It helps us work the algorithm there. All those links that I just described available to you at the website, wrestlingatrandom.com. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. This was an easy watch, but a completely inconsequential, unnecessary watch. The podcast, definitely necessary, but the show, I wouldn't say you necessarily need to go back and watch it.
No, we watched it so you don't have to. And with that, we're wrapping it up. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.